Today I'm focusing on a museum, but I want you to keep in mind that adaptive reuse applies to all these different typologies. Now, especially here in DFA, we're always walking into reused buildings, right? Especially here in the center. But adaptive reuse, in its popular definition, implies a combination of new contemporary industrial materials with an older antique existing building, as you said. And a really good example of that right down the road from us here is the Economic Museum, Museo Mide. Who's been there? Okay, if you haven't been, as architects, I absolutely encourage you to go. It is a beautiful museum. It's a historically preserved colonial building with a contemporary retrofitting into a museum, much like what I'm going to talk about now. So the reason that these buildings are chosen to be reused is to fit contemporary need. And some of the standards that they're chosen by are for land preservation, reduction of urban sprawl, brown site cleanup. Do you all know what a brown site is? Brownfield site? Okay, well, we'll come back to that in a minute. Cultural conservation, historical preservation, and neighborhood revitalization, most importantly, what I'm talking about today. Another word that's sometimes synonymously used along with adaptive reuse is retrofit. And retrofit can imply to, is an industrial term, but it's the act of adding a component or accessory to something that it did not have when it was manufactured. So here are some examples of retrofit adaptive reuse museums. Just a few examples. This is MoMA, you know, the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. This is their contemporary branch called PS1. It is a retrofit old school, actually. This was the public school #1 in Long Island City. Here you have the Museo Universitario del Chopo, right, which is a retrofit train station, I believe, into a gallery. The Tate Modern in London, and Fundidora in Monterey. Also, this is one of my favorites within New York State. This is called Dia Beacon. Has anybody ever been there? It's a really cool museum, and do you know Nabisco crackers, Nabisco cookies? It's one of their old factories, and it was made into a museum for minimalist art. This is in in Beacon, New York. So it's a train ride away from New York City. So today, thanks to LEED, adaptive reuse is becoming more and more popular. Do you all work with LEED in your classes? Okay. Who knows what LEED is? Okay. Well, I will go on a little bit about this. I think that LEED has become very popular around the world, and especially right now in Mexico in the past, I would say 5 years. It's becoming more and more used as a standard to identify green building. So the HSBC Bank, which is right by El Angel on Reforma, that's actually one of Mexico's first LEED buildings. LEED stands for, and the reason I bring this up and add this into the presentation is because I believe that if you're studying architecture today, you must know what LEED is, and this can show you how adaptive reuse relates to LEED. So LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It was created in the United States by the U.S. Green Building Council as a way to make buildings more environmentally friendly. It's currently the most widely used, internationally accepted form of environmental building code. So again, even though it was started in the United States, it's the most widely distributed environmental building code in the world. And okay. So LEED is configured to regulate 7 main areas of design and operations process. So they have standards that they check for all 7 of these areas to make sure you're complying to environmental regulations. Those 7 areas are sustainable sites, locations and linkages, water efficiency, energy and atmosphere, awareness and education, material resources, and indoor environmental quality. Now, when it comes to adaptive reuse, many times you will find that within sustainable sites. So, for instance, under LEED for sustainable sites, most often, in order to gain the highest number of points, an architect or urban planner will choose a brownfield site. And a brownfield site is a site that has a lot of toxic waste in it, or was an industrial site that is no longer in use. So it's just sitting empty, nobody's using it. It's kind of a waste of land, you might say. So for instance, in Monterey, in Fundidora, they took that brownfield site and made it into art museums and a park. And so that's an example of choosing a brownfield site, a sustainable site, to get LEED accreditation. And just a note that Fundidora will also have the first LEED Platinum certified building in Mexico. There are many other LEED buildings in Mexico, but this will be the first platinum level, which is the highest level of LEED, by Iñaki Echeverria. I'm sure as urban planners in DF, you all know him. Okay, here is one of my favorite examples of a reused brownfield site. This is the Ritz-Carlton in Washington, D.C. So you know, as far as hotels go, it doesn't get much better than the Ritz. But it was actually made, it's a 5-star hotel, but it was actually made in an old garbage incinerary, which is a place where they used to burn garbage. So that's the power of interior design and interior architecture, is to take a site like this and adaptively reuse it into something new to revitalize the area. Okay. So today I'm going to talk mainly about, as I told you, Masamoka. Here's the building, and you can see from the front main entrance, it's a campus composed of many different buildings, which used to be factory buildings. We'll get back to that in a minute. So where is this place? North Adams, the museum is in North Adams, Massachusetts, which is in Berkshire County in Massachusetts in the United States. So this is in western Massachusetts. The Berkshires are known for their beautiful landscape. It's a big cultural connection in Williamstown. So you can see that, where am I, sorry. Here's North Adams, Massachusetts. And here we have Boston, New York, Albany is right up here. Albany is the capital of New York State. We have Washington, D.C., and also Philadelphia very nearby. So maybe this might not seem very close to you, but in this area of the northern United States, people are used to driving long distances to see culture. So for instance, from Boston, my eyesight is so bad, from Boston to North Adams is under a 3-hour drive, but which by standards in this part of the world is very close. And you can also see here that North Adams is located between in the valley of 2 mountain ranges. And as you'll see later on, the Hoosic River also flows through this area. So this is the campus downtown, in downtown North Adams, over in this direction. And then you have the university over here. And you'll see later on it's also connected to Williams College. So just keep this map in mind as we go along. The population of North Adams is very small. It's 13,708. And the total land area is 53.3 square kilometers. So this is an antique portrait of North Adams back in the day when it was a major factory town. And here you see another older image portraying North Adams as sort of this mecca or utopia of factories and mills. And this is what North Adams looks like today. You can see that the town when the factories left, became a little bit impoverished, and so the government was looking for ways to bring it back to life. Let me just... Here's just another map. So the township's history. In the 1700s to the 1800s, due to the proximity of the Hoosic River, North Adams and towns like it became mill towns. And these were manufacturing everything from shoes to iron warships used during the Civil War. They were really, really important to the North and the culture in all the cities that surrounded. From 1860 to 1942, the factory that now houses the Mass-Mocha complex was the Arnold Print Works. And here you can see a picture of the Arnold Print Works. And if you remember back to the first image I showed you, you'll see that visually it hasn't changed that much, as a matter of fact, which is one of the points of adaptive reuse, is to be very sustainable and do as little construction and demolition as possible. So, and I think I forgot to leave out just a bit of a personal history and attachment to this, that when I was your age and most of your ages in my licenciatura, I worked for 2 years at Mass-Mocha. I worked as a curatorial intern, so actually doing research for art exhibitions. So if you have any questions about the town or the place, I actually lived there for 1 year. And I can answer them, and feel free to raise your hand as we go along. So the reason that the Arnold Print Works was so important was that it had the latest equipment for printing cloth. It had large government contracts for army clothing, and basically it employed most of the town of North Adams and the neighboring town of Adams. By the end of the 1980s, 25 of the 26 buildings that make up the contemporary campus were built. Did you have a question? Anybody? No? Okay. So, and then during the 1960s, the textile and electric industry began to change in ways that were detrimental to the survival of North Adams and the mill culture. Okay, just the way that the whole textile industry started to change, it no longer benefited the community. So Sprague Electric took over Arnold Print Works, and it was able to hang on in the society until 1985. At that time, the Sprague Electric was the main employer for the city. So this is a gallery building for Mass-Mocha today, but here you see it in its historic use as Sprague Electric, and it closed in 1985. North Adams was known as a company town, which is even to this day very common in smaller townships throughout the United States, that there will be one big company that employs most people, and so there's a family loyalty and life kind of centers around the company. So Sprague employed over 4,000 of the 20,000 town inhabitants. In order to be able to understand North Adams and why maybe it would be chosen to be revitalized, why not just let it fade out when the factories closed? Because we need to understand Williamstown. So in 1985, when Sprague Electric closed, nobody had jobs anymore. They had nowhere to go. And they weren't really qualified to work in the nearby Williamstown, which was a cultural capital, which I'll get into in a minute, rather than an industrial capital. And the more educated and the younger people started to move out of the town. I think probably here too you do see sometimes younger and more educated people moving into bigger cities trying to get better jobs. Well, that's what happened in North Adams. They moved out to Boston, to New York, to Philadelphia, or to just bigger townships. And with that, a lot of the ideas went too. So the town was sort of just impoverished and not doing well whatsoever. Meanwhile, next door in Williamstown, Massachusetts, which is only 14 minutes away from North Adams, it was a very, very prosperous, internationally known cultural capital. And here you can see in the map, we're still here in the Berkshires. This is Berkshire County. Here is North Adams, and then we just drive along Route 2 here, as in you can see here. Very, very close by, you have Williamstown, Massachusetts, and just a zoom in detail. So having lived there, I can tell you personally that it's a very stark contrast. The minute you cross the border from Williamstown to North Adams, you know you've left a white-collar town into a blue-collar town, and a very, very prosperous place into a place that was really struggling. This is, by comparison, what Williamstown looks like. Okay, just some images from the town. This is, Williamstown is the home to Williams College, which is one of the most prestigious colleges in the United States. A lot of actually princes and sheikhs and very important future politicians have gone there. And in terms of art, Williams College is actually one of the best colleges for art history in the United States. A lot of times the people that graduate from the master's program there are called the Williams Mafia because they run all the big museums in the United States. It's really probably very interesting because even though it's a very small town in one way, the cultural significance and its linkage to these big cities is just extraordinary. Big cities within the northeast of the United States and also around the world. No, I did. I went to Pratt Institute in New York. Williams is also the home of the Williamstown Theater Festival. Just to give you an idea how connected, for instance, like Meryl Streep and Gwyneth Paltrow perform in the Williamstown Theater Festival quite often. It's home of the Clark, which houses the graduate program I just talked to you about, the Williams, the Sterling and Francine Art History Masters. And it is also the home of Williams College Museum of Art. So the beginning of MassMoCA actually sort of starts with Williams College Museum of Art. At the time, and you can remember that even though these towns are really close by, culturally they're very different. People who live in Williamstown really would have no reason to be going to North Adams. But at the time, the director of the Williams College Museum of Art was Thomas Krenz, who is, at this point, he was the director of the Guggenheim for 20 years after leaving the Williams College of Art. He was very inspired by an art fair that he went to in Cologne, where artists rented abandoned factories to show their art. And he thought, wouldn't the Sprague Electric Factory, the abandoned Sprague Electric Factory, be the perfect site to reuse as a contemporary art museum? And we could have rotating collections, and all these artists could come from cities all over the world, and we could bring this culture here. So Krenz won approval from the North Adams Mayor John Barrett III, and in 1988, the Massachusetts State Legislature gave a $22 million bond to start MassMoCA. Other monies came from $9.4 million in private funding for construction and $5.6 million in private contributions for startup programming and operations. There was a renovation team for Phase 1, which is Cambridge, Massachusetts, like Boston area-based architects. And the feasibility study was done by such famous architects even as Frank Gehry and Venturi Architects. SOM. These are names I hope that you know, and if you don't, write them down and look them up. So, MassMoCA today. MassMoCA, after receiving this bond, what became, the museum finally opened 10 years later after all this sort of construction and fighting bureaucracy, and became the largest space for contemporary art in the world. So extremely linked to the international art world all over the entire globe in this tiny little town because of its connection to these cities. And the museum infused 56 million of public and private funds into the once impoverished town of North Adams. So what happens when you bring all this culture and all these funds to an impoverished area? Well, before we get to that, I just want to show you that this museum And as architects, this should interest you, so maybe you want to look online at it a little bit more. But in 2000, it won the American Institute of Architects, which is the most esteemed accreditation in the United States, National Honor Award for Design. It won the Historic Massachusetts Elliott Award for Historic Preservation, and the Massachusetts Historical Commission Preservation Award, so on and so forth. And Thomas Krenz, who originally conceived of the museum and went on to be the director of the Guggenheim, has said in the art world that Mass MoCA is actually a Guggenheim. He said, I won't brand it as a Guggenheim, but it is every bit on par with the Guggenheims around the world. And do you know where this is? Where? Where? In Bilbao, Spain. Okay, this is the Guggenheim in Venice, Bilbao, sorry. This is the Guggenheim in Venice, New York. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm so sorry. You know what? This one is in Abu Dhabi. Sorry. Excuse me. Yeah, the newest one, the newest of the Guggenheims. And then Bilbao and in New York. So you can have an idea, even if you don't follow the art world, you can have an idea of the global stage that this museum is on. It's on all the people who work with Mass MoCA, they will work with the Guggenheim too, so just an idea. So today there's 25 buildings on 13 acres. You can see this large campus here. Okay. And their facilities include 19 galleries with more than 1,000 square feet of exhibition space. They have one gallery that's as long as a football field, 10,000 square foot black box theater. They have a lab theater, an outdoor cinema, and I will just show you some pictures really quickly. Here you can see how stage by stage, how the museum is opening up, because they didn't open all the buildings at first. At first, it was just in stages. So this is one of the interior galleries. This one is actually the size of a football field. I hope you all can go one day, because you'll really feel the impact there. I saw a Robert Rauschenberg show there, and from that, I actually decided to go to art school because it was so impressive. This is the biggest art gallery in the world. This one. And this is Sai Guo-Cheng, Inopportune there. Matthew Ritchie in another gallery. And you can see the beam structure and everything. They left it intact, as you do normally in adaptive reuse, bring attention to details from original antique structures. Sometimes things that we don't really, sometimes details that you wouldn't find in contemporary construction. Use the construction around it to highlight these details. This is an outdoor performance space. So what is, again, just to get back to the urban impact of this, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the before and after of this retrofit. Well, you've heard the before, and now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the after. Oops. Okay. So they're really connected within the region, working with different museums within Massachusetts, New York, and Philadelphia. And I mean museums all over the world as well, but these are their permanent convenios, non-changing. And this sort of diagram shows organizations in the Mass MoCA community. And what I love about this is before you had this area over here, which is Adams, which you can see it's showing like the poverty levels. And you can see that this is the highest poverty level here in North Adams, which is the 12 to 46%. Now, because it has this cultural center here, North Adams, it is connected with this neighborhood of organizations in a very, very wealthy area. And I can't tell you what that does for people's education levels as well. Before, people who are sons and daughters of factory workers and factory workers themselves, all of a sudden they have a cultural linkage to this cultural capital of Williamstown. And they're seeing artwork from all over the world. And it's not just the artwork, it's the music, the theater, but the sort of people that brings with it, and the creative class that's in the streets of North Adams, buying houses, shopping, having conversations with locals. And I think that's something that you should all keep in mind as urban planners, is like how your planning can bring people together or separate people, and what that will do for the future of your society. And to this note, as a personal antidote, going back to Fundidora, I would just like to say, like, I don't know, how many of you have been to Monterrey, Mexico? Well, hopefully more of you can go, because it's one of your main cities. But, you know, Fundidora is a retrofit building as well. It's in the downtown of Monterrey. The university where I teach, for instance, is in San Pedro, which is a sort of suburb of Monterrey that's much more affluent in the way that Williamstown is affluent compared to the downtown of Monterrey, which we, in this case, could compare to North Adams. Many times people from San Pedro will never go into Monterrey unless they're going to Fundidora. And this is, again, is a meeting of culture, okay? And I feel like in design, as a designer, that's a very, very important point to consider, how you can bring people together and educate them through design. Okay, so before this was an abandoned factory, now they receive 120,000 visitors a year. For a town of only 13,500 people, I think that's quite a lot. And 80% of those visitors are from outside the state. So if you can imagine all these foreigners coming to this town, experiencing this town, bringing their money, bringing their culture, and receiving the culture of North Adams. And then this is a local, here's again the museum. This is a map of the local revisiting patrons. And I just would like to point out like all the different economic levels that are constantly coming to this museum. It's great. Another thing that happened when Massimoco went in, according to the census report and to a private study that was conducted, was that people staying in hotels and paying for hotels spiked dramatically. So here Massimoco opened in 1999. You can see just like 1, 2, 3 years later, the huge spike in people staying in hotels in North Adams. So that was really excellent for the revitalization of the urban area. In addition, Massimoco has its own private real estate holdings. One of them is the Porches Inn, which is right across the street from the museum, and that's a hotel itself, which actually a lot of the artists will stay at. They also have artist residency housing and intern housing, so they own a lot of houses that before were, again, abandoned. This all was completely abandoned, falling apart. And they went in and adaptively reused it and revitalized it. So basically, the point I'm trying to make is that the township of North Adams wouldn't really exist without this museum on any sort of global stage. Certainly, you would never hear about it, I can imagine. And the other important point is that for all these cities nearby, this is one of their main spaces to show contemporary artwork. Okay, they also have, because of Massimoco, right in the very block, the quadras that it's on, 5 new restaurants opened, plus they have 2 of their own restaurants at the museum. It's really interesting. You would never think you could go and look at real estate, bienes raíces, on a museum website. Can you imagine Googling this museum, and on it they have a section for, do you want to buy a house in the area? But actually Massimoco does, and that's part of the cultural urban push to get people to think of it as a place to buy second homes. For instance, people who live in New York City who want a weekend place, they're trying to promote it as that. And to this end, I wanted to show you this diagram, which shows the increase in property value since the museum went in. So here in this blue area that looks kind of like a lake, that's the Massimoco campus. Around it, you can see these are the housing. So right around the museum, the property increased by 80,000 to 106, 8,000 to 10,000 dollars, which is quite a lot for just overnight increasing, just like that. And then you can see the further out from the museum you go, the less the value increases. But the point is that all the property in this town increased its value when the museum went in. In 2002, MASMOCA and the local government conducted an output in-plan study using Minnesota In-Plan Group's technology. This study shows how much money you put into the museum and how much money comes out of it. And it's similar to studies used by Americans in the Arts Economic Prosperity Study, which is a cultural study to see which is an economic study to see how much cultural institutions improve the economy in the areas that they're in. The data that was collected from museum records and the census. So MASMOCA created a $9.2 million output in 2002. That's like 3 years after it opened. 5.6 of that output went towards the museum budget, which also includes bringing artists from Germany, Switzerland, France, Brazil, Mexico. There's great Mexican artists shown there. 100.9 million was infused into local businesses, restaurants, hotels, etc., even the hospital, actually. And another 1.9 was from elevated household expenditures. So people's salaries went up because of the museum opening, and therefore they were able to spend more money, 1.9 million more. The average yearly output is 14 million. Okay, and this is just another chart showing in 2007 some of the output. And the economic impact, you have museums, hotels, restaurants, etc. Okay. So MASMOCA created 230 jobs from 1998 to 2003. Those are direct jobs, like hiring at the museum and that sort of thing. The annual payrolls in the town from the time that before the museum was open till 2001, 2 years after it was open, increased $24 million. Okay, the average salary went from $24,991 in 1998, the year before the museum opened, to $27,114. That's an 8.5% increase in the average salary. And small to medium businesses increased 12 to 15%. So many more businesses were able to open. And according to census reports, tax revenue between 1994 to 2003 in the Berkshire County grew 75%. But in North Adams, it increased 300%. I think that's incredible. So basically, this is just sort of a short presentation, but my point to you is that don't forget as urban planners and architects what a difference one building makes, okay? And don't overlook spaces that maybe aren't popular or might seem difficult to use, because you can see from this small case study what a difference one museum or one institution can make. So that's all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.